joining here?
Well, this is a little bit of an experiment when it comes to the technology. We're halfway there, and hopefully that will work. Now, this is quite a stronger microphone, so I won't get too close. Can you hear? Beg pardon? But can't you hear? No? Yes. You can hear well? Yes. Do you want me to be closer still? Okay. All right. Well, the idea here is to get share the experiences of four different perspectives, people coming from different parts of the world or living in different parts of the world. And we are trying to pose a couple of questions in line with the theme of the conference. We're asking ourselves, can we see in the evidence around us the beginnings of a significant international current, if not movement, that is both intellectual and practical around the issues of a just and ecologically sustainable peace. And related to that is the second question: what can we do at the level of ideas and practice to give further impetus to the idea of a peace that is both just and ecologically sustainable? And to help us do that, we have a panel of four outstanding contributors. Four contributors to issues of justice, peace, and care of the earth, in one way or another. And they're going to share with us something of their knowledge, their insights, and of course their experience. The four are Kanchana Wirakon on my left, and I'm going to say something about the four of them very briefly because you have the details in your folders. Kanchana is from Sri Lanka. She has been actively engaged for many years on issues of environment and climate justice, and amongst many other things is the co-founder of Journeys for Climate Justice, which is based in Melbourne as well as in Sri Lanka and beginning to get going in India. And then we have Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, whom I have known for a very long time and worked very closely with over the best part of 4 decades. He is one of Asia's leading public intellectuals. He is a leading voice in Asia, of course in his own country, Malaysia, and is the president of JUST, which he has been for a very long time. He was, until he retired, most recently, Professor of Global Studies at the University of Saint Malaysia. For those of you who may not know, he's written many books, and I can refer you to the details in your form. And then we will go across to Marie Dennis, who has been for some time the co-president of Pax Christi International, has played many other roles in different periods, and is herself the author of 7 books and regarded as a leading contributor and advocate of peacemaking, peace building, and reconciliation. And finally, to our, we can I suppose say we working for the Red Cross and the Red Crescent. So it's a very significant panel we have together, and we have with us, and together hopefully we will be able to glean something from their understanding of where we're at and perhaps where we're heading in the foreseeable future. And without much further ado, I will invite Kanchana to address us briefly for about 10 minutes or so, each of them, and then we'll open it up to some questions and perhaps a little bit of conversation amongst the four of them, technology permitting. Thank you. Yes, please.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, it was very nice to know some of you right from the morning, and I really hope to interact more tomorrow as well. So, yes, as you see, I'm going to share a story, and of course a real life story, which is very successful story about these green leaders who really made a big change in Sri Lanka for last 9 years. And since we started Journeys for Climate Justice here, my friend Jim Crossway, who is the co-founder of Journeys for Climate Justice, and we all would love to share this successful role, the story, and which is applicable for other countries as well. So that is the most key point, I suppose. So EcoV is my own organization which I started 19 years ago in Sri Lanka. So it is a national organization, but when we set up JCJ, I really brought up that philosophy and inculcated that in our own work related to climate change. So EcoV, as you may know, is based on the 4 Buddhist principles, which is now we are applying into conservation, that is the loving kindness, compassionate for suffering, and of course the altruistic joy for others, and unshaken lifestyle, which is mudita, no matter ups and downs happen, you are just you are. So that is the concept that we inculcated into climate change scenario, because we all have to have some kind of insight into these global issues and take it, and of course not overwhelmed by what is happening, but we have to see what we can do being in the middle path. So with that, the concept of this power, and we talk about in the morning also, the power is very much damaging in conservation world, because you really can't rely on the human power, because natural world is acting on its own way. So when the tsunami happened, the human power we couldn't do anything in Sri Lanka in 2004. It is just the natural scenario. So we have to understand getting rid of our ego, and of course thinking like, ecocentric. That is what we are trying to tell our youngsters in Sri Lanka whenever we are running all these projects. So that is the concept we are sharing with next generation. Be an ecocentric person who can really understand power is equal and it is all over the world, and we can't really say I am more and somebody is less, because it's everybody interconnected and sharing everything together equally or less. We don't know because we can't see it. And of course, when we started EcoV, as a Buddhist, I had this thinking, inner environment is very much forming us who we are as outer world. Because my thinking may not equal to your thinking, and my own thinking, which is not seen, is there due to ethics, our religious beliefs, and of course emotions. And me as a mother is more emotion than my husband. He's a father. So these all are different, but that all form one person, which is forming our inner environment. But through 5 sensory organs, we are reacting to the outer world. And of course, according to our beliefs, we know that 5 great elements are common for all living and non-living beings. So we call it all beings. And I just heard the other word, earth beings, in our workshop. They are with the group. with each journey, and we traveled 10 to 12 days in Sri Lanka. We traveled 12 to 12 days in Sri Lanka, starting from one point to the other point. So we had river journey, we had bicycle journeys, we had ocean journeys. All these are training programs for youngsters to understand the ecology, the ecosystem services, and of course climate change repercussions that each of those places are facing. And of course, how we did that through the Journeys for Climate Justice, this organization is based in Melbourne. We promote about these journeys, and all the people who are traveling either by flights or car, they can offset their carbon, travel carbon, not just to plant trees, but to plant green leaders. So that's the concept that we introduced to Melbourne. You offset as you wish via, when you go to our website, there's the calculator, you can calculate, but you can offset as you wish, and that money goes to train the youngsters who are fighting with climate change, adapting with climate change, and planting many more trees. So that is the concept that we introduced. And because everything, when I talk about climate change and sustainability, it is intra and interconnectedness. Everything is connected like a cobweb. You can't see where you are. We all are those dewdrops on this cobweb. If one strand is shaken, whole cobweb is shaken. So that is the concept that we are telling youngsters. So you have to you have to do your duty on this world, because we don't know when something is going to be wrong. So if you are behaving sustainably and doing some good work, you will get results good, and if you are doing something negative, you will get negative results. So with that concept, all these youth are coming from different faiths, so we didn't have a religion there. We had a religion, that is Mother Nature. And of course, different the races. We have 7 main races in Sri Lanka: Sinhalese, Buddhists, Sinhalese, Tamils, Hindus and Muslims. Sinhalese, Tamils, Muslims and Burgher, and of course 4 different religions. So common goal is positive actions toward climate change. Outcomes are beautiful. It's more ripple effects, and behavioral change is the action. And these are the little snapshots that I'm sharing with you. When we had our journeys, you can see we ride the bicycles for 10 days, talking about zero emission, and bicycles were sponsored by travelers from Australia. And then these bicycles are with those youth now. They are using them for another 2 years to do more ripple effects, to do more projects in Sri Lanka. So that's what we say. It's not just planting a tree. They are planting trees, and they are looking after those trees, because every tree they plant has a guardian. And it could be a school student, it could be an armed force person, or somebody. And of course we do environmental meditations together, listening to bird calls. And that particular one who is doing that meditation with that posture was an ex-combatant for LTT, the terrorist group we had over 30 years in Sri Lanka. And this person is a very big example. Today he is working for government of Sri Lanka and a climate change champion. So he does a lot of programs in Sri Lanka. And I will conclude with this poem he wrote during one of his journeys, and it says, it's a journey that had given a meaning to humanity, it's a journey that blends beauty of nature, it's a journey where beautiful places are observed, and this is a truly journey where nature becomes life. So the poem goes on, this is a journey that brings shame to those ordered to kill, this is a journey that brings shame to we who killed people, this is a journey that changed hatred, this is a noble journey of peace. Isn't it beautiful? This is his first poem in his entire life. He was 30 years when he joined with us. Now he's 39 years old, and he is a Roman Catholic, but Tamil. And yesterday he messaged me, "Ma'am, we are going through another really bad time in Sri Lanka. You need to run more journeys." So I was really, and it brought me tears into my mind, because he says this is a journey that makes us understand what we believe. Peace in mind means peace in world. And reconciliation is not just compatible with another human being. It is just the compatibility with all living beings and the nature. So it's other living beings and non-living beings. So this is the true meaning of journeys, and this is the message from journeys. Thank you.
We're nearly with you, Chandra.
Microphone's on. Okay. Could you do some speaking for us, Chandra?
I can hear you, but I don't think the audience can yet. Just hold it for a second.
Just a bit of a test. I've got a little volume adjuster. If we can go, maybe we can move to another next speaker. I have another idea how to make that work to get more volume.
We don't think the same. Marie, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. Chandra, can we hear you now?
Yes.
That's pretty good. Well, I think we're all go now. So Dr. Chandra Muzaffar is our next presenter. So I invite you to share with us some of your thoughts on the issues which I know are of deep concern to you. Chandra.
Joe, fellow panelists, friends, peace be with you. Let me begin by thanking Joe and the organizers of this forum for this very kind invitation. It's my pleasure to be with you, even though I'm a few thousand kilometers away from where you are. Your question, Joe, about efforts to achieve a just, ecologically sustainable peace. If one adopts a global perspective, one gives the impression that we are not moving in the direction forward. One is to be very candid and honest about what's. I would like to try to finish this by giving some very specific examples of different dimensions of this challenge of a just and ecologically sustainable peace. If one looks at the question of climate change, for instance, as a starting point, I don't think there's been any progress beyond the Paris Agreement. If at all, we regret with the departure of Swiss America from that agreement. And certainly the country is can behave as if it is the exception. It can just rules that on else. And that's partly because of the asymmetry as far as the global power struggle. And that's a major challenge. Number three, if you look at the global economy, every time leaders from business and politics, and these are the elites that we meet in Davos, and they talk about the global economy. They're not prepared to address the question of global inequalities, about growing disparities, the way in which wealth has become more and more concentrated in the hands of a few. You know, it is just amazing that fewer and fewer people, perhaps 8, perhaps 10 people, the amount of wealth that they command is perhaps as much as what 1/2 of the human race has access to. Now these are injustices, and if you look at it another dimension, and this is the religious dimension, we've just been reminded yet again of what had happened in Sri Lanka. That there is a great deal of hate and bigotry. There's violence in companies. This hate and bigotry expresses itself in different ways in reality. And we've had numerous instances of this sort, some worse than others. And all this is linked to that last word in that formula of yours, Joe, peace. I don't think we've had peace at all. We've not a world war, it's true, with the way in which it's conventionally understood. But we've had numerous wars, and we've had the victims and the casualties of this. Millions of people that lost their lives in great war, in countless war all over the world. So that's the reality, that's the situation. And we have to ask ourselves, as people who are concerned about these challenges, what is the root? It is not right to reduce everything to a single variable, but nonetheless, I think it is power that is the fundamental issue. The way in which we seek, perpetuate, preserve our power, and the power at the highest levels of society, power at the national level, at the regional level, at the global level. This is what it is that we're, and it's the misuse, the abuse of power. And this is what we call hegemony and the impact of hegemony. Dominance, control over others. The few over the many. And you see it everywhere. The climate crisis is part of it. The crisis in global politics is a manifestation of it. So is the crisis in the global economy, in the question of religion. It's always a small group who plays religious sentiments in a perverse manner, and the whole question of peace is related to it. What does one do about this? Many groups all over the world for a very long while try to change this situation. They were modest ways. My own organization, this very small organization called the Compassion Movement for the Just World, and Professor Camilleri is also part of it. We have attempted to bring about changes in certain areas, but we haven't had much success. But we continue to try because we believe that that is what the struggle is all about. Is to go on endeavoring, go on trying to bring about. In the midst of all these modest efforts for numerous individuals and groups all over the world, there is perhaps one event which has given us some hope. Though it began as a tragedy, but the way in which people and the government responded to that threat has told us that there is hope and we must not give up. Now, what is that event, I'm afraid? analysis, they all relate to the question of leadership. And I think in the case of Ruth Gillen, Jacinta Ardern showed the world what leadership is. The ability to act decisively, the ability to act with a deep sense of justice, and more important, a deep sense of compassion. And this is what leadership is all about. So in the analysis, this is what we have to work towards. Producing leaders who will be able to assume that mantle of responsibility and act on behalf of the noblest and finest virtues in us, all of us. And this is the reason why at 72 I keep going, because I believe that this is possible, that human beings can reach to the best of them and to the best of our people. Thank you.
Murray, we're now going to come to you. As I mentioned before, Murray is co-president of the international movement Pax Christi, and she has been involved in many aspects of peace work for a very considerable period of time. We look forward to hearing from you. Murray.
Thank you, Joe. I'm very happy to be with you this afternoon. I'd like to share with you all briefly a bit about another hopeful effort that is moving the global institution of the Catholic Church to contribute substantial resources, educational, financial, communications, and so on, to promoting active nonviolence around the world as a powerful and effective route to sustainable peace. In early April, 75 people from 21 countries met in Rome for a high-level workshop on the theme Path of Nonviolence Toward a Culture of Peace, co-sponsored by the Vatican and Pax Christi International's Catholic Nonviolence Initiative. This was an important follow-up to our April 2016 conference on nonviolence and just peace, with a similar goal of deepening Catholic understanding of and commitment to active nonviolence. Both gatherings brought together participants from around the world, representing a broad spectrum of experiences in peace building and creative nonviolence, to contribute to a renewed Catholic teaching practice on war and sustainable peace, violence, and nonviolence. The recent gathering included lay people, theologians, members of religious congregations, priests, bishops, and cardinals. As in the 2016 conference, many participants live in communities experiencing violence and oppression. Mexico, Venezuela, Colombia, Honduras, Brazil, Uganda, the Philippines, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Fiji, South Sudan, Kenya, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Palestine, and more. Participants engaged in dialogue about the roots and the failure of violence, the theology of peace and nonviolence, and a new just peace ethical framework for Catholic thought on violence, war, and just peace. We shared many stories about the power of nonviolence and strongly urged the Church to mainstream nonviolence as a spirituality, a lifestyle, a program of societal action, and a universal ethic. Too often, we think nonviolence is misrepresented, misunderstood, too narrowly defined, or wrongly dismissed as either passive or naive. Very strong evidence suggests a different conclusion, that active nonviolence is powerful, effective, and intrinsically interconnected with the promotion of integral human development and the care of creation. In fact, one of the great gifts of our age is growing recognition of active nonviolence as a positive, constructive, and powerful force for social change, a process for ending violence without lethal force, for transforming conflict, for effectively protecting people and the planet at risk, and for fostering just and sustainable alternatives. You may be familiar with the work of Maria Stephan and Erica Chenoweth, who conducted a landmark study of nonviolent civil resistance campaigns over the last 100 years. The results were published in a book entitled Why Civil Resistance Works, the strategic logic of nonviolent conflict. Stefan and Chenoweth found that from 1900 to 2006, nonviolent civil resistance campaigns were twice as likely to succeed outright as violent insurgencies. Their study is a phenomenal example of the kind of empirical research needed to help us understand more deeply the power and effectiveness of specific nonviolent practices for protecting vulnerable communities and the earth, for preventing violent conflict, for transforming structures of violence, and for promoting cultures of sustainable peace in particular contexts. As a human community, we're just beginning to acknowledge the importance of sustaining peace, of building peace in its own right, not only in post-conflict situations. For example, the Sustainable Development Goals insist that sustainable development and peace are intrinsically interconnected. Catholic social teaching, and especially Pope Francis' emphasis on integral human development, also point to the intersection of social and economic justice, human rights, ecological sustainability, and just peace. Given what we now know about the consequences of war, physical, economic, psychological, and certainly ecological, and what we've witnessed over and over as wars fail to accomplish whatever was their stated purpose, and war begets violence begets war, it seems evident that if we are ever going to achieve the kind of just, sustainable peace and real security for which we all want, the global community needs to give vastly more intellectual and financial resources, creativity, and courage to developing effective conflict prevention, peace building, and other nonviolent tools. In the past 3 years, the Catholic Nonviolence Initiative, as I said, is a project of Pax Christi International, has engaged in a very serious global conversation about the breadth and potential of active nonviolence to further sustainable peace. An ambitious, carefully organized international process of discussion and discernment on different themes related to nonviolence and just peace involved over 125 theologians, peace practitioners, activists, and academics. We explored a theology of nonviolence and began to articulate a new moral framework that leaves the language of just war behind. We reflected on women and nonviolence, ecology and nonviolence, nonviolence in many different faith traditions. We gathered excellent examples of nonviolent action in different circumstances around the world, and as a Catholic organization, we developed proposals for how the institutional church could integrate nonviolence into its very fabric. The Catholic Church, with its diplomatic presence in almost every country and at all major international organizations, as well as a well-developed network of universities, seminaries, religious communities, local parishes, publications and media outlets, a membership of over 1 million people, and rich spiritual and theological resources that could make a tremendous contribution to the development and acceptance of nonviolent approaches to a more peaceful world. In addition, we're working to identify and support more and clearer public policy proposals at the European Union, at the UN, and elsewhere that promote peace building and nonviolent approaches to national and international conflicts so that the world will have alternatives to armed action when crises occur in the future. A policy framework based on nonviolence and just peace would call for investment in a wide range of nonviolent options, from diplomacy to trauma-informed healing, from restorative justice to atrocity prevention, from civilian-based defense and protection to conflict transformation training, from support for nonviolent civil resistance to just sustainable development, from truth and reconciliation processes to justice for and inclusion of women and youth. It would address direct violence, structural violence, cultural violence, and ecological violence with particular attention to the root causes of violence. At the same time, we're listening very carefully to people from different contexts, believing that nonviolence in the context of, for example, occupation in Palestine, nonviolence in the context of poverty or street violence in Haiti, nonviolence in response to extractive projects that are pillaging the earth, nonviolence from the perspective of liberation theologians, nonviolence intersecting with institutional structural racism, nonviolence in response to the climate crisis, nonviolence in post-colonial Africa, nonviolence in Asia Pacific, where the nuclear threat is all too real, will look very different. The obstacles are huge, including the powerful forces behind the big environmentally destructive business of making war, but we are enormously encouraged by the progress that we've made so far to successfully convince the institutional Catholic Church to adopt active nonviolence as its gospel-based default approach for Catholic teaching in a violent world, we think could make a huge contribution to the paradigm shift that we all seek. Thank you.
We're hearing some quite remarkable, not just people, but shared experiences that provide us with much food for thought. And this will no doubt also apply to Helen Durham, whom I've introduced briefly before. She's on a very brief visit to Australia. Australian though she is, most of her work is in different parts of the world, and back she goes the next few days.
Next few hours, actually. Well, thank you very much. It's actually a delight to be here. I'm based in Geneva at the headquarters of the International Committee of the Red Cross. And initially I was going to do this by Skype, but I happened to be out visiting family members. I have to be at the airport at 3 o'clock this morning, so I'll have to have a few more cups of coffee, I think. But it's a great pleasure to be here and a very, very important topic. Just for a moment, the International Committee of the Red Cross is part of the Red Cross and Red Crescent family that focuses specifically on armed conflict. We have a mandate that has been granted to us by states under the Geneva Convention, the 1949 Geneva Conventions, and I have the great honour of being the Director of Law for the International Committee of Red Cross, which is the first time ever in 150 years they've had a woman doing it, and definitely the first time they've had an Australian. So, it's funny, our culture is very different than the Swiss, but as this is being filmed, I will be elegant. So what I wanted to do was start off very briefly with a couple of the challenges that we see as the ICRC, International Committee of Red Cross. I have 18,000 colleagues in every war zone in the world. We have doctors, nurses, people who visit people who are detained. We have lawyers, we have former military officers who are all working to try and make sure that there is a reduction of suffering during times of armed conflict. And I just wanted to flag some of the challenges we experience, which I've been found it very moving from all of the three other speakers. The way that we have to move beyond the problem analysis and actually look at actions. But to start with, what we are seeing globally is that armed conflict is increasingly protracted, so it lasts for a longer period of time. It's increasingly urbanised, so we see fighting being moved into urban centres. We're finding that the number of parties to a conflict are fragmenting. So there's more non-state armed groups today, or in the last 6 years, than we've experienced in the last 60 years. Now that doesn't mean that there's not always been non-state armed groups. Other organisations might call them terrorists, but we in the ICRC have to take a neutral attitude to those who are engaged in conflict. So we see protracted, urbanised, fragmented. We're also seeing currently challenges around what we call the dehumanisation discourse. As governments and media are rightly talking about the need to have counter-terrorism measures, we are seeing this utilised by powers across the world to actually dehumanise individuals. And that's maybe something I can talk a little bit about. But we're also seeing two things. One I wanted to focus on a little bit is the idea around new technologies and weapons. We're seeing cyber warfare, the use of autonomous weapons, artificial intelligence, and some deep ethical issues about going forward, what role do we as the international community want to have for for humans to play a role in the decisions relating to killing of other humans. Because we are looking at a lot of issues relating to killing through algorithms, killing through cyber weapons. So I'll come back to that in a minute, because it's both a legal issue that we're facing at the moment. I was in New York 10 days ago. I'll be going to Moscow, and when I get back to Geneva, talking to authorities, militaries, armed forces, and scientific community. And there's a legal paradigm, there's the scientific paradigm, but there's the deep ethical paradigm. So I wanted to spend a little minute on new weapons. We've also got, though, something that I think is very big and is not talked about enough. We need to rebuild the confidence in the fact that we have a legal normative framework that makes a difference. We are living in an extraordinary time. I agree, what we see is unacceptable. But if you look at the statistics, we are living in a time of greater peace than ever before. A number of, say, 100 years ago, when I look at the statistics of my colleagues about the deaths during times of armed conflict, they are much higher, much more significant than they are today. But in fact, we all have a mind frame that today is the worst time humans have ever experienced. And so one of the things we're trying to do in the ICRC is what we call change the narrative around the laws of war and show examples that when the normative framework is applied, it works and it makes a difference. Because today, everyone walking down the street on their iPhone can see what doesn't work. So we are losing the idea, and I would say it's almost a depth of a faith in the fact that human beings can treat each other with kindness. We are being overwhelmed with the negativity. I must admit it's rather heartbreaking to come to Australia and see, and rightly so, concerns around terrorism when I'm in Iraq, where we are having a high number of people being killed. There is less paranoia, there is more openness. So how do we, as human beings, find a paradigm that adequately addresses the fact that there are groups that want to do harm, which doesn't dehumanize the rest of us? And finally, I think one of the really interesting issues is the relatively recent development in 2017 of a treaty to prohibit the use of nuclear weapons. And if you want to see an interface between conflict, climate, and security, this, ladies and gentlemen, is where it meets. And that has been quite a moving journey for me, to be honest, because since the nuclear weapons were first used, the first group on the ground was a delegate from the International Committee of Red Cross. And when I started in Geneva 5 years ago, I got my colleagues to go into the archives, and we found the original telex that he sent back, and it said, strange illnesses, people seem okay and then they die. And we've got so much documentation of actually what happened in Hiroshima post the use of nuclear weapons. And what I've been able to say, whether I address the Security Council, or address heads of state or foreign ministers, is today we do not have this luxury of not knowing what this strange weapon is. And today we know that organisations like the International Committee of the Red Cross, the World Health Organization, the United Nations, we are not equipped to deal with the humanitarian consequences of nuclear weapons. We are equipped to deal with many horrors, but these we are not. So if we're not equipped to deal with them, the only way to move forward is to ban these weapons. And so the ICRC, and certainly with my team, I have 140 lawyers globally, many in war zones, but also a number in Geneva. One of the things that we were able to do is to demonstrate that we do not have the capacity to deal with this issue. And we saw in a lot of work we did in New York and in capitals and around the world, the creation of this new treaty. Now, of course, like most new treaties, those that possess nuclear weapons have not signed up. But to be honest, it's a bit like asking smokers to create anti-smoking legislation. You always start with those who have the understanding of why this is important. So the treaty currently has 22 states that are ratified. I spend a lot of time with other members of my team. I've got about 100 diplomats. We travel globally to engage in encouraging states to sign up to this treaty. It will enter into force when there's 50 ratifications, and at the moment there's 70 signatures, but 22 ratifications. But what I've found is very, very interesting with this new framework is it changes the impetus where people have to say, everyone says, yes, we believe nuclear weapons are bad, but we believe they allow for a holding of balance of power, or we believe there's something that brings peace because of these matters. But when there is a treaty that states have to decide whether to sign up to, it means you have to say, well, if you believe in that, then sign up to the treaty. So I'm finding often law is a very clumsy and slow tool to change human behaviour, but it sets a framework of expectations that you work towards, whether it be the Ottawa Treaty, the Landmine Treaty, that many years ago, I remember at the time when that treaty was entered into force, there was a lot of cynicism about, well, landmines don't know the difference between whether a treaty is entered into force one day or not. But I know from my colleagues who are surgeons in war zones that 20 years ago, approximately 20,000 people a year were killed or maimed by landmines. And today that number is down to 3,000. And that is because of global awareness raising, it's because of the stigmatisation of this treaty, of this weapon through the treaty. So I think what we always have to do is have strong hope and strong tenacity that in the face of criticisms, these steps forward, whilst they are at a diplomatic level, allow for a groundswell of information. The final thing that I think the world is struggling, as I mentioned before, is this negative discourse that why would we bother? You know, the world's all about bullies. I think it was articulated beautifully by one of the speakers. You've got superpowers that ignore everything. They're the biggest bully in the playground. They can do what they want. But what is quite interesting, if you look at the global power discourse, and we're finding that quite a bit in engaging with the UN, the distinction between power and authority is shifting. With the and I think we won't have time to talk about it now, but there's some really interesting reflections around powerful states that are losing authority because of behaviour, and they're the sort of things we have to challenge, we have to engage in, we have to lead into. But it has been very, very interesting to try and twist the narrative of saying the laws of war never work, to say actually when they do work, this is the impact. And we're currently gathering examples globally of cases where a change of order in relation to of command has reduced the suffering on the battlefield. A change of particular use of a calibre of a weapon has allowed more civilians to survive. Because we ourselves, all of us who care about international peace and security, we're sometimes our own worst enemies, because we're always talking about things that don't work. We're always saying, and I spend a lot of time sitting in offices with attorney generals, telling them that they must be better, this doesn't work. But therefore, people think that it never works. And we need to start saying, actually, the reason why these principles of equality, of neutrality, of humanity are worth fighting for is because they make a difference. And so I think we need to balance that narrative a little bit. I also think that this idea that what we're experiencing today is so different, so deeper, so much more difficult than the past, is something we also need to look at very carefully. Last year was the 40th anniversary of the additional protocols to the Geneva Conventions of 1977. So, and you can tell I'm a bit of a history nerd, so I asked one of my team members to go into the archives of the ICRC and tell me what kept the former Director of Law, Swiss-German gentleman, as they've always been, what kept him awake at night 40 years ago? And see if it's the same things that keep me awake. And they did a lot of research, and they said the big issues back 40 years ago was non-state armed groups, so terrorist groups, because you had wars of liberation and you had different groups and different ways of fighting, and new technologies, because they had in the Vietnam War a use of new aerial bombardment. And if I could say snap, which in Geneva they wouldn't understand, but I think Australians, it's so nice to be able to say things like snap. Snap, intellectually snap, that's what keeps me awake at night. How can we make sure the weapons that are going to be used in future wars are able to distinguish between civilians and combatants and still have that ethical link of human agency in decision making? And secondly, how do we deal with these non-state armed groups, many of them today that actually, in a way, promote when they breach the laws of war. They disseminate it, they put on the internet when they breach it. And the number of my colleagues that have been executed or kidnapped at the moment, who work for the ICRC, is quite extraordinary with these groups. And we've done a lot of studies, and we haven't got time to talk about now, on working out different ways we can influence and engage with them. And often it's actually talking to the religious leaders in the country. So rather than talking to the military, we're spending more time. I have a fabulous group of lawyers in my department in Geneva. They're from different Islamic countries. They know the Quran very well. They're experts in international law. And they're looking at how we can have conversations, not through holding up the Geneva Conventions, which a lot of people think of Geneva, cuckoo clocks, chocolate, far away, but to actually finding attraction between belief systems of this idea of having humanity in war. So hopefully, I think my time is up, and I know we're short on time, but I wanted to flag some of the challenges and the fact that we have to have hope and faith and tenacity and courage and creativity to ensure that we find this space for humanity during times of armed conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen, and thank you to the other three speakers. So we now have a few moments for some questions that you can address to one or other of the speakers. So I'm going to get 3 or 4 questions together and then ask the 4 speakers to address that particular question which most relates to what is on their mind. So, who would like to ask? One? Another? Who else would be interested to ask a question?
May we ask each other?
Oh yes, we're going to come to that. Yes. Anybody else at this point? Okay, please. 2.
Thank you. I very much enjoyed the panel and quality of all the presentations. Specifically though to Helen, a Roman Catholic nun named Rosalie Bertel, who's now passed on. She was an epidemiologist. I think she had a number of honorary doctorates for her scientific work and her peace work. She documented the activities of the US military in investigating the potential of climate manipulation as a weapon of war. She also she has published a book actually called The Earth as a Weapon of War, using the Earth as a weapon of war. Of course, as this research goes on, I understand there's a research base in Alaska where most of this takes place. They're using electromagnetic radiation, high level and low level. So I'm interested to know what is being done around the world to deal with this outrage.
We've heard 4 very powerful speakers, and each has revealed knowledge to me about what's happening at an international level that I had no idea about, and I'm just sort of wondering in a way why I didn't know any of this, but it also points to the question about how does the knowledge of all the positive stuff, particularly the last speaker, that's happening at a global level, I tend to be pretty negative about that, but how do we really, if you like, build our spirit around what is possible internationally?
And while all 4 of you are thinking about those 2 questions, I'll add a third, and we'll see. One of the issues that all 4 of you raised was the question of working with other groups, the possibility of collaboration. So that's really my question. All the organizations that were mentioned by all 4 speakers are obviously doing marvelous things. But what do you see as the opportunities for much greater collaboration between different organizations, and particularly between different organizations around the connections between peace, justice, and care of the earth? Do you see a room for much more effective, much more widespread, both local and everything up to the global level, for effective, cooperative, dialogical cooperation between groups, working in different areas and in different parts
Because when we did the first journey in 2011, nobody really understood what we were talking. And then when we really did it, and a video, the documentary was published in the online YouTube and shared it widely, a lot of people asked, oh, if I knew that, I would have been a partner. And because my organization is working in this same situation and I want to partner with you more. But the thing is, and then when next journey was announced, sometimes they say, oh well, this time not, maybe next time. So I had some examples like that. Some companies, especially multinational companies, when they get the idea that we could do something, and they love to do that, but it's gone. But when we announce that something is happening, they say, uh-oh, you know, and then that is a human nature, I believe. And but again, the same time, there are a lot of people come on board and try to be collaborative and cooperative and try to do something good. So it is like 50-50. There are many opportunities when only like-minded people really click that the bell and the ring. If the bell ring, then they will join. But otherwise, it's really like just the egocentric human being who run the organizations and not seeing them out of their box. That they just try to be them. So that's my experience coming from Asian context.
I might go next to allow our colleagues then to share the big screen. Well, thank you. Some really important questions. Certainly, when we look at new ways of waging war, environmental modification, which is the term that we're looking at, and I've got scientists in my department looking at that, is one of deep concern and little knowledge. So I must get the name of the sister that's worked on that. Environmental modification and human enhancement, which are not exactly the same but similar, where we're looking at the way that militaries are changing the body. For example, lasering in night vision into eyes, changing skeletons of humans so they can climb up in a certain way. So there's categories. I've got a section in the department that work on weapons. We've got the categories that work on conventional weapons. And what is really interesting, and this is something that keeps me awake at night as well, although I do sleep well as an Australian, I'm relaxed. The vast majority of individuals being killed today are being killed by conventional weapons, by targeting decisions in places like Syria. So the majority of suffering today is being impacted by conventional weapons. So how much time and energy do we spend on conventional weapons, at the same time looking at the future of environmental modification, human enhancement, autonomous weapons and other things? So last year we had a very interesting seminar in Geneva where we invited from 20 big countries with big militaries, from India, from the US, from Russia, from the UK, what was called the military futurists. So they're those that sit in the military that look at the future. And the big issue that they saw, and that everyone from a different culture at very senior colonel level and above agreed, is that humans should continue to play a role in killing, that there should not be delegated out to algorithms. But there was very little discussion, even though we pushed the point on environmental modification. And so the way we're looking at it is we're about to, in the next 2 months, the ICRC will release its guidelines on the environment and international humanitarian law, because there's a particular article in the additional protocols that prohibit overt destruction of the environment as a methods of warfare. So what we're trying to do though is, when it's difficult to get information from the researchers, we have to then replicate the research. So without going into further details, there is a group of people working on that issue that I'd be very interested to understand more. When it comes to the issue about positive best practice, I'll be really quick. Thank you. The international community has spent the last 2 or 3 decades, rightly so, focusing on the creation of international criminal enforcement mechanisms, which I would call the stick, how you prosecute people when they breach the norms that are agreed upon. But what we need to also balance that with is the best practice exchange. So you've got the carrot as well as the stick. And I think we have to be more sophisticated in being able to talk about that. But it's very difficult. I have interviews with media, The Guardian, New York Times, and if you start actually talking about the positive things, it doesn't seem to sell newspapers. So we need to be tenacious on saying we are moving forward. And finally, the International Committee of Red Cross we don't play well, we don't partner well with others traditionally. Because of our neutrality, it's quite difficult. But I'm working very hard, and on the nuclear weapons campaign, for example, we've got 30,000 people globally and many more signing up. So I think we need to, I feel as the institution I was part of, we need to work better with other organisations. Our neutrality makes it difficult, but I think the only way we can move forward is actually finding the connections where we can push it further forward. Thank you.
Can I ask Chandra and then Murray to comment on any of the questions that were asked? Chandra?
Yes, I have not been able to make out quite a bit of what was being said. You know, the sound isn't very good. Perhaps you could summarize
the question, yes. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Well, one question was about what can we do more effectively to spread knowledge and understanding of some of the more positive things that are done in order to give people hope and encouragement in what the future might bring. And the second question that I had asked is, do you see enhanced opportunities in the future for more effective collaboration between organisations working in different areas or similar, different, or partially connected? And the reason why I ask that question is that very often, and I've been involved, as you know, with many, organisations are very keen to get cooperation for their initiatives, but are not so much geared to coming up with cooperative projects that are much more mutually developed and designed. So that's what's behind the question about collaboration. So, Chandra.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Now, what can be done now and in the future to enhance cooperation? What are the opportunities that are available? I think the new technologies do evolve the type of opportunities that earlier generations did not have for cooperation. And the new media conscious of our shared humanity, partly because of technology, but also because I think societies are becoming more multi-ethnic and multicultural in various parts of the world. As we become more conscious of one another, more knowledge of each other, I think there will be greater inclination to work with one another, to share our experiences. This again is not something that one can prescribe. There's no formula for things like this. It's something that will happen with the changes that are taking place. It's a long-term process, and we should commit ourselves to that sort of long-term goal. While at the same time, I think we should address the immediate challenges that confront us from time to time, whether it is a massacre somewhere or issue pertaining to environmental degradation. We address those challenges, but at the same time, I think there is this need for long-term perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Chandra. Marie?
Yes, maybe just a few thoughts. It does occur to me that I believe that at this time there is a significantly increased cooperation between, for example, universities and faith communities and more grassroots movements of ordinary people who are looking for the kind of evidence that universities are able to provide, the kind of research that can be done there, in order to shape the work that they're doing. I think that we're at a time when the intersection of work being done in faith communities across many different traditions, the research being done at universities, the local grassroots movements, peace movements and environmental movements, and multilateral organizations. I think there is significantly stronger cooperation and collaboration, and I think that's a really positive sign. The second thing that I think is very important is to echo the importance of telling the stories. I think that we are in a time when the media repeats over and over again stories of violence and tragedy and horror. And we don't know the stories of people working in their communities around the world who are finding creative and effective ways to both protect the planet on which we live, to live in a sustainable way, and build peace. I think that locally we need to retell those stories. We need to share them with each other. We need to make them visible. And we, as Chandra just said, we have the capacity to share those stories now in a way that was not so easy even 20 years ago. So I think it is a time when collaboration and cooperation is increasing, and I think we need to make that happen even more effectively, and I think we need to keep telling the stories of hope that actually we encounter on a daily basis, no matter where we are in the world.
It's just about time to close, but are there any questions, the four of you, any thought you would like to put to the other three?
I just had a quick one, and thank you, Mari. It's actually it really made my heart sing when you started talking a lot about the evidence, because I was recently talking to the major donors of the International Red Cross, and we're a $2 billion organisation. We're big, and I asked them, what is it that changes the minds of your political masters? Is it experience, because we go into places that no one else goes? Is it expertise, because we have a lot of expertise, or is it evidence? And they all said from across the globe, it is evidence. And I think the humanitarian sector, if I may speak on my own behalf, having spent many years, we've been at times a little shy in putting the pressure on ourselves around evaluation, around gathering evidence for statistical evidence. And I know in my own work, the ICRC is linking up for universities. As you mentioned, I've got 5 law clinics globally, from Israel to the US to others, to gather these positive stories. We're using 400 university students, master students in law clinics. And I think we just need to be smarter about connecting our intellect with our desire for humanity.
Yeah,
Anybody?
it's a great point.
Anybody else wants to add either a thought or a question? I think we have exhausted the speakers and the participants, if not the subject. So we have had, I think, an excellent array of insights and knowledge shared with the rest of us. It just remains for us to show our appreciation.
Guys, you're doing a wonderful job.
Thank you.
I hope you're getting paid dangerous.
I am, but I'm also working 30 hours today, so there's that.